Hi, all, and welcome back to There's Danger Here. I'm Leilani, and today I'm going to bring you a pretty infamous case out of Houston, Texas that highlights the need for people to pay attention to mental health, symptoms, cries for help, and how a person's really doing. So, let's get into it, shall we? Andrea Pia Kennedy was born on July 2nd, 1964, in Houston, Texas. Her parents were Andrew Kennedy and Jetta Kohler, and she had 4 older siblings. Andrea was raised as a Roman Catholic, and most sources report she had a fairly happy childhood, though there are a few that I found that say Andrea suffered from bulimia and depression during her teen years. There's also several that say many of her other siblings also suffered from mental health issues throughout their life. Once at 17, Andrea spoke with a friend about suicide. Still, when she went to Milby High School, she was the class valedictorian, captain of the swim team, and an officer of the National Honor Society. She graduated in 1982. After high school, Andrea attended the University of Houston, finishing a 2-year pre-nursing program, and then immediately moving on to the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston, in which she graduated as a registered nurse. After graduation, Andrea worked as an RN at Houston Cancer Center, starting in 1986. As Andrea was out on her own, she met one of her neighbors, a Russell, or Rusty, Edison Yates, in 1990. They seemed to hit it off, and 3 years later, they married on April 17th, 1993. Rusty worked as an engineer for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA. The couple had their first child, Noah Jack, in 1994, and shortly after, Andrea quit her work in order to be a stay-at-home mother. You see, Rusty was a devout Christian and listened to the religious teachings of a one Michael Warrenecki after hearing them at the Auburn State University, where Michael was preaching. Later, Rusty would bring his wife into the specific teachings of Michael as well. The couple began listening to the fundamentalist philosophy of marriage, in which the wife was to give up her job, not to use birth control, and live basically in a patriarchal society. According to Cult Education, Michael Warrenecki teaches that women who work or practice birth control are witches. He even once wrote a pamphlet that stated, quote, "At birth, a woman inherits the contentious nature of Eve, and a man is born with the passive nature of Adam," end quote. Please insert an eye roll here. Of this, Andrea's friend, Debbie Holmes, described Rusty Yates as, quote, "controlling, critical, and demanding," end quote. Shortly after Noah was born, on February 26, 1994, NASA sent Rusty to Florida for 6 months. So Rusty moved their items into storage, and this small little family moved into a travel trailer. Then, when they returned to Texas, instead of moving back into a sticks and bricks home, they moved into a bus that was actually belonged to Michael Warnecki previously. And during this time, the family grew by 3 more boys. John was born on December 15th, 1995, Paul on September 13th, 1997, and Luke on February 15th, 1999. Andrea, of course, had to homeschool her children while taking care of the ever-growing family, to the point where Rusty never changed a diaper, according to any of the sources I found, of all of the eventual 5 children they had together. Of course, Andrea struggled with her mental health, which declined rapidly with the addition of each new child. So, I think it's important to get into her mental health and the issues she's faced. After the birth of Noah, Andrea reported seeing Satan and images of death. She began to lose weight rapidly and she isolated herself from others. On June 16th, 1999, Andrea was overwhelmed and reached out to Rusty, saying she absolutely needed help. Rusty, in return, took her and her children to stay with her mother. Her first suicide attempt occurred on June 17th, the day after she told Rusty she needed help, in which she took 40 trazodone tablets in an attempt to overdose. After this, Andrea was sent to a psychiatric center and was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, subsequently being released with a prescription for antidepressants, though at this time, purportedly, she wouldn't take them. Her social worker looking into the case, Norma Torek, reported that Andrea was, quote, not able to identify any recent life stressors, end quote, and that Rusty reported his wife to be, quote, struggling with the concept of salvation, end quote. Norma called Texas's Child Protective Services abuse hotline on June 23rd to report the family's, quote, living arrangements and the fact that the patient's husband allows the 3.5-year-old son to use a power drill, end quote. 7 days after the complaint, Dan Wilbur, CPS Supervisor 2, wrote, quote, because the situation does not appear to involve the occurrence and or substantial risk of abuse or neglect, we plan no further inquiries, end quote. Additionally, Norma's concerns were also sent to the Houston Police Department because, quote, they do appear to have jurisdiction in such matters, end quote. Norma had ominously written a note at the bottom of a CPS letter, quote, important, please place in the chart of Andrea Yates, end quote. Unfortunately, this letter remained in her file without much being done until it was far too late. Now, sources vary on this, but either 4 days later, on July 21st, 1999, or 3 weeks later, Andrea threatened to slit her own throat with a knife. She was found in the bathroom by family. She subsequently fell into a catatonic state and required further hospitalization. This time, she was admitted to Memorial Spring Shadows Glen Hospital under the care of psychologist James P. Thompson. To him, Andrea reported, quote, I had a fear I would hurt somebody. I thought it better to end my own life and prevent it, end quote. When speaking, she went on to talk about her hallucinations. Quote, there was a voice, then an image of the knife. I had a vision in my mind. Get a knife. Get a knife, end quote. During care, she complied with her medication regimen of antipsychotics and participated in therapy for postpartum depression. When she was released, the psychiatric doctors recommended she not have any more children as her mental health would be at risk. You see, she was prescribed Haldol, a strong antipsychotic medication, but that medication cannot be taken while one is pregnant. After her inpatient stay, where she stayed for approximately 2 months, she was treated for a short time as an outpatient. The family finally moved into a home in late 1999, but they didn't seem to heed the warning of medical professionals. In March of 2000, Andrea simply stopped taking her medication, and shortly after, she was pregnant again. Mary was born on November 30th, 2000, and unsurprisingly, 4 months later, Andrea's mental health spiraled and depression took over once again. And once again, she stopped eating, stopped tending to her children, cut herself off from her family, and then began self-harming. She was hospitalized twice in the spring of 2001 for this at Devereaux, Texas Treatment Network, and again treated with antipsychotics, including restarting Haldol, and then was eventually released back home. In 2001, she was hospitalized again, and after spending 10 days in care, then 7 days of partial hospitalization program, or PHP, in which she went to the hospital for treatment but was home during the day. Andrea was released to her home on May 22nd. she was to continue seeing care on an outpatient basis. On June 4th, 2001, psychiatrist Mohammed Saeed took Andrea off Haldol, and it is unclear why he made this decision at this point. It's also difficult to find the specifics, but if she wasn't weaned off her antipsychotics, which is Haldol, there is a proven increased risk of relapse in psychotic symptoms, as well as a risk of developing a condition called tardive psychosis. According to facts.net, quote, tardive psychosis is a condition that often emerges after prolonged use of antipsychotic drugs, typically those used to treat schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. Symptoms can include hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thinking, similar to other psychotic disorders. Unlike other forms of psychosis, tardive psychosis may not improve even after stopping the medication that caused it. End quote. Still, she met with her psychiatrist as an outpatient on June 18th, 2001, and at this time, there were no red flags. On June 20th, 2001, however, the day started much as any other. Rusty left for work, probably not worrying much about the day, as Andrea's mother was supposed to come over within the hour of him leaving. But then, a phone call shattered her community. The then 37-year-old Andrea called 911. Her children were all dead. Andrea had given her children a bath, first drowning 2-year-old Luke, followed by Paul 3 and John 5. She carried each of the children's bodies to the master bedroom, placed them on the bed, and covered them with a sheet. Then she drowned 6-month-old Mary. As she did so, Noah, who was 7 at the time, confronted her. Quote, "What's wrong with Mary?" End quote, he asked, and then, probably upon realizing what she was doing, tried to run. Andrea chased Noah through the house. She ended up dragging him to the tub and drowned him alongside his dead sister. According to her, she had to use more force with him, and his head came over the water several times before she was able to complete the act. After murdering her last child, Andrea put those two in the bed and covered them up, cradling Mary in Noah's arms. After getting off the phone with 911, Andrea made a second call about 8 minutes later, this time to Rusty, asking him simply to come home. When he asked if anyone was hurt, she reportedly stated, quote, "Yes, the children, all of them," end quote. Andrea was immediately arrested for the murder of her children. She confessed, giving all the details to police, in which she reported that she killed the children to save them from hell. During her time in jail, it is also reported that she was suffering from hallucinations, and she would speak gibberish at times. Often she would pick at her head, believing that she was branded with the number 666 on her scalp. A doctor within the jail diagnosed her with cacodemoniomania. The diagnosis meant that Andrea believed she was possessed by an evil spirit. Professionals also believed that these delusions were made worse by the teachings of Michael Warrenecki. According to the Cult Education, there is a strong connection between Andrea, her declining mental health prior to the murders, and Michael Warrenecki, that her delusions aligned with the preachings of Michael, proven through correspondence between the two, culminating in her first suicide attempt in 1999. Susie Spencer was able to read the correspondence and says of it, quote, "I think he was a big influence on her. Before they met, Andrea said that she wanted to work and continue nursing, and afterwards she took up this belief that women are weak and sinful and should stay home," end quote. Also, according to Susie, Michael wrote both of the following in letters to her. Quote, "God knows how wicked you are," end quote. And, quote, You must accept the reality that your life is under the curse of sin and death. You are a daughter of Eve. You must become a daughter of the Most High." End quote. On July 30th, 2001, she is formally indicted on 2 counts of capital murder and pleads not guilty by reason of insanity. Still, 3 months after her arrest, she was declared competent and would be able to stand trial. On February 18th, 2002, Andrea's trial began. Prosecutor Joseph Omby opened by telling jurors that Andrea Yates had spent 2 years planning to kill her children. Quote, "The breath was taken out of their bodies by their mother." End quote. In return, in his opening arguments, defense attorney George Parnham told jurors about Yates' history of postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis. He stated, quote, "Postpartum depression with psychotic features is the cruelest and most severe of mental illnesses. It takes the very nature and essence of motherhood to nurture, protect, to love, and changes the reality." End quote. Her trial lasted a mere 17 days. During the trial, defense psychiatrists testified that Andrea was not competent, that she was in a psychotic state when she committed the murder. Prosecution admitted Andrea was mentally ill, believing that Satan was telling her to kill her children. But, being religious and knowing that it was Satan speaking to her, she should intrinsically know that what she was doing and what she was being told was wrong, that any actions would therefore also be wrong. A psychiatrist for the prosecution, Park Dietz, testified that Andrea was mimicking an episode of the television series Law and Order, in which a woman was acquitted of killing her children by drowning them. The trial concluded on March 12, 2002, and the jury convicted Andrea of capital murder for the deaths of Noah, John, and Mary. 3 days later, on March 15th, during sentencing, she was given life in prison. While in prison, Andrea was placed on suicide watch on October of 2003 after refusing to eat, and then again in July of 2004 for the same reason. On April 30th, 2004, George Parnham filed an appeal, reviewed by the Texas First Court of Appeals, who, on January 6, 2005, made the decision to reverse Andrea's conviction. They reported that the, quote, "erroneous testimony by psychiatrist Park Dietz may have prejudiced the jury," end quote. This came after finding out that no such Law and Order episode had ever aired. As such, a new trial was ordered, to which one of the responding officers of the site of the murders, Officer Frank Stumpo, said of the overturning of the first conviction, quote, "What, that she got the idea off a TV show and the TV show never existed, so you're going to overturn the conviction of a person that killed 5 children? That's absurd." End quote. On January 9th, 2005, Andrea Yates, once again, pleads not guilty by reason of insanity. Almost a month later, on February 1st, 2006, State District Judge Belinda Hill approved a $200,000 bond for Andrea on the condition that she voluntarily committed herself to the Rusk State Hospital. The next day, Andrea was released from Harris County Jail and admitted to the Rusk State Hospital for psychiatric treatment. So, in between trials, Andrea remained locked up at a state hospital rather than jail. Then, on June 26, 2006, the second trial begins. The trial lasted exactly a month, and this time the defense harped on mental illness, on postpartum depression, how the lack of treatment was just as harmful to her as it ended up being for her children. At the end of which, the jury deliberated for 13 hours over 3 days. On the last day, they asked for photos of all the children. Before giving out their verdict, they conducted 2 minutes of silence for each child murdered. Then they notified the court that they had come to a conclusion and reported that they rejected the state's theory that Andrea knew her actions were wrong. July 26, Andrea was found that her plea was adequate and she was not guilty by reason of insanity. Quote, "It was very clear to us all that she did have psychosis before, during, and after," end quote, Todd Frank said on behalf of the jury. Following the verdict, Andrea was sent for mental evaluations and by January 2007 was sent to Kerrville State Hospital for treatment. In May of 2012, Andrea petitioned to attend weekly church services, which are located outside the hospital, but she was denied. 2 years later, on February 2012, Andrea and her doctors at the hospital request Andrea be allowed outside of the grounds in supervised group outings that occur with other patients. The media takes hold of this, and public does not offer their support. Instead, faced with criticism, the request is withdrawn. Since she is in a state hospital, she is eligible for competency reviews to determine if she can leave to be completed annually. As of 2022, which is far as I could find, she has waived every review in order to continue treatment. Rusty, throughout it all, had some controversial ideas. He openly reports that he doesn't hate Andrea for the events, and while he is saddened, he believes her mental state is to blame and that she too is a victim. But still, by March of 2005, Rusty does divorce Andrea. And that is the unfortunate case of Andrea Yates and the murder of her 5 children. The effect of mental health and mental health illnesses seem obvious here. She does get treatment for many years, but still, it is clearly not enough. And in the end, 5 children have to lose their lives. To all those out there listening, be careful. It's a dangerous world we live in.